Hi, my name is Ahmed from Community Consultants. We are working on a very exciting project at the moment, training a team of members of the public from across East Anglia in participatory appraisal. This is part of a project by the Eastern Academic Health Science Network and the Citizen Senate. So they have been involved in trying to hear from the communities across East Anglia, and at the moment they're trying to hear about people's experiences of health and well-being. That information is going to go to help Northstowe, which is a new healthy new town which is being built north of Cambridge. And all this information that these members of the public, these peer researchers are going out to gather is going to help them and inform them in their developments of Northstowe. So they've very nearly finished their research right now, and we've just finished a day of analysis, which you can see behind me, all the post-it notes. So the team have been trained not only in how to do qualitative participatory appraisal research, but they're also being trained in how to analyse that information. So they've gone out into the community, they've done 11 research sessions across East Anglia, spoken to an incredibly diverse range of people, so other people like them that are service users of all sorts of different health services. And they've gathered that information, they've analysed it into key themes, which they're going to tell you about in a moment. And that information is going to be put not only into a written report, which we'll share with people, but it's also going to be used to inform a stakeholder event, which we're going to be doing in September, where we're inviting members of the public, commissioners, decision makers to come together and think about what we can learn from this research, what themes have come up, and most importantly, what actions, what solutions have the members of the public come up with? What do they think is going to ensure that Northstowe is a healthy new town? And I'll let them tell you more about what they've done.
So we got a lot of feedback around health support, as you would expect, I guess. And there were some topics that came up again and again and again. There was a lot about waiting times, perhaps as you would expect as well. Especially from children and young people, we heard about actually waiting in the surgery was a bit of a pain and a bit boring. And we had some really positive suggestions from young people around that, around things that you could do. For example, having iPads for younger people that could be interactive, so it could help explain, who's at the health centre, what services were available to them. Obviously make it age appropriate, so it could be really probably from 5 up, but also having games on it, but they were health related games, so it could be educational. We heard about continuity of care, so not enough information sharing between services, that people didn't see the same people twice, that people had very short-term courses of support and then they suddenly stopped, so there was no transition, or that they could be longer. A lot of the health support seemed to come from perhaps not necessarily the NHS, but community services. There was a lot of people advocating for community services that they'd received for mental health and more funding for those things. And I think we can't overestimate how much voluntary sector, community sector support and activities can improve people's health and well-being, and how valuable that is.
Okay, so I wanted to talk about mental health because it was quite consistent in the feedback that there was lots of positive conversations and feelings about peer support that had been received, which is why we felt that to set up peer support mental health drop-ins for particular groups, and I guess the groups reflect a lot of the groups that we visited in the workshops. It seemed quite consistent from lots of the feedback that arts and crafts was a particular activity that a lot of people were drawn to for health and well-being, so that's been included in those points. I think people strongly were drawn to groups and peer support, so meeting others and hearing others' journeys and recoveries was more beneficial than kind of individual services. So I think it's important that we have both, but I think the provision of peer support and groups is what kind of emerged.
So just adding to what Michael said about mental health and peer support, one of the things I wanted to highlight was about some of the feedback from the specific workshops. We did hear about how the referral systems and stuff were, people had to wait a long time. By the time they got to the service, they had actually got to a stage where perhaps the intervention was too late and they had got to crisis level. Some of the courses or support that they received was quite short and it needed to be longer, or there needed to be transition. But they did pick up on what Michael said about activities, arts and craft and sort of group stuff and peer support being really important. Also, across a lot of people, but I would say especially young people and young females, was not being listened to and not being taken seriously. A lot of these young people were experiencing mental health issues, not necessarily as the key issue for them, but it was it happened as a consequence. And they weren't being taken seriously by health professionals. So I think, and also people said this that had autism or learning difficulties as well. So I think there's something around mental health, around people being taken seriously, about language being simpler and that sort of thing as well. I just remembered when I was speaking to one young woman, and she specifically said, I got told that my suicide attempt wasn't real enough for help, and that I was not mental enough for help.
They wanted more of a community-centred information sharing. So there was a lot of sharing that they wanted, but they weren't sure whether they wanted it on a completely digital or whether they wanted it on a one-to-one basis. But the big predominant thing was that they wanted it in one place. They could go to libraries where they can actually pop in and speak to someone regarding information, a bit like a tourist information board, but within a library but in a community area where they could actually access it in a better form.
They wanted a hub in the community where they could go to find out all of this information, whether in the hub it had somebody working there or whether it was all digital. Or lots of posters on the walls to show different things that are going on. Also using social media to promote different things that are happening.
So, I met with an older gentleman who was over the age of 80. He wouldn't say how old he was, but he'd had a really tough experience with his wife, and he'd moved back to the UK, and he felt that actually there was nothing for him to do. He tried to join some of the groups like Men's Shed and other arts and crafts and life craft and things like that, just to see if he can get involved in the local activities. And what he found is actually there wasn't anything for people over the age of 80, especially men. And it was reiterated by some ladies as well who said the same thing, who were the age of 60. They said there's nothing for them to go to during the day. There's always something in the evening, but there's nothing during the day, which I think is really important. And one of the other things that was mentioned was one by a young mum who had 3 children, and she said she can't take her older 6-year-old along to a group for 2-year-olds or even young children, so she'd have to find things to happen over the holidays, and put one in one group and then take the other one, so they don't never get any time together as a family.
Yeah, so lots of people spoke about community spaces, and particularly young people, about there kind of being football pitches and places that can go for picnics and kind of get together. People talking about that importance of the green spaces, and also leisure facilities as well, kind of affordable leisure facilities that all people of all ages can go to, kind of from kind of teenagers or children as well, right up. I think it comes back to a bit of a mental health thing as well, doesn't it? It's just so good for kind of your well-being, and that space kind of getting together, bringing people together, and kind of, for me personally, when I see a green space and you see children kicking a ball about, and just think, oh, it's so nice, and especially in a really built-up area, that we've still got those, and kind of, not kind of sat in front of the TV or video games and things like that. You've got that accessibility.
So for those that perhaps, whilst there isn't a gym or they can't afford to go to a gym, they may well do their exercise, and we want to encourage them to do their exercise in green spaces. So people were commenting about the importance of keeping those footpaths clear, and bridle paths or cycle paths or whatever, the sort of smaller lanes perhaps, and making them safe. And I think that could be something that could positively encourage people moving to Northstowe in the meantime to be accessing those spaces that are there, that are in their environment. And also, I think it's been shown that it's really important to children under the age of 5, the positive health impact of having access to the countryside. So I think there's a very strong case for looking at nature and the countryside, and there is lovely countryside around Northstowe.
I look forward to visiting Northstowe, in particular the nature reserve. I think the open green spaces and water will be beneficial for everyone's mental well-being, so it's also important to think of the simple things that provide a big benefit for everyone.
Mainly that they wanted the paths to be big enough for pushchairs, wheelchairs. They wanted lower pavements, to make it easier for people to get around. There was one person that made quite a memorable quote to me about how the councillors should go round in a wheelchair themselves for the day to see exactly how accessible everything is for them. They feel that even disabled parking spaces weren't always located in the correct areas, so they'd still struggle.
At one of the workshops where we spoke to different parents, that this idea of the people who make the decisions actually having to experience things. So one of the good suggestions that stands out is councillors and decision makers having to try get around in wheelchairs themselves, or if they had a buggy. I remember one of the mothers was telling me, it's all right having this centre, but can you get everywhere and do everything with a buggy and 2 children? So I think that should be taken forward.